Okay, welcome to FinnFest USA's second February webinar on Multilingual Finland. My name is Helena Halmari. I am your moderator from Sam Houston State University, Texas. Thank you all for joining us. The co-organizer of these two panels on Multilingual Finland is Lotta Weckström from the University of California, Berkeley. And of course, FinnFest is the ultimate organizer who allows us this platform. And we're very happy that we can do these webinars. We were just talking about the current geopolitical situation, and we all worry about it, and we are just here to remind ourselves that we have a Finland which is free to be multilingual. So last Saturday, we started our Multilingual Finland panels by presentations on Finnish and Finland-Swedish in Finland. Today, we continue this theme with presentations on more of Finland's languages: Sami, Romani, Karelian, Russian, Estonian, and African languages. This is a 2-hour webinar, and because it's a webinar, it allows for a larger audience, but the audience members will not be able to see one another. So don't wonder if you don't see your picture there. Your camera is still working, but it's not possible for a webinar format. You can, however, communicate to everyone via the chat function. So if, for instance, you want to tell us where you're tuning in from. We have 4 panelists who will each present a 20-minute talk. After all the 4 presentations, we'll have a question and answer session where I will moderate your questions and comments to the presenters. Please use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen to type your questions that you want to be presented to the panelists. As they come to your mind, you can start doing that when the presenter is presenting, so they are then ready to go after all the 4 presentations. FinnFest USA has asked our panelists to provide a list of resources in case anyone is wondering, where can I learn more on this topic? So these resource lists will be posted a little bit later on FinnFest USA's website. Today's event is recorded, and the recording will be available soon on FinnFest USA's website, typically the beginning of the beginning week. Your donations make it possible for FinnFest to continue to offer these events. All donations will be received with gratitude. FinnFest continues to provide this programming, so please check out. There are already 3 presentations that will be featured later this year. So please stay tuned and keep checking the FinnFest USA's website. I will now briefly introduce our panelists. All are active and well-known scholars in the fields of expertise. We will start these 4 presentations by a presentation entitled "The Sami Languages, Alive and Kicking." And the presenter, the panelist here is Dr. Koppeli Kok. She's a professor of Sami Studies and Digital Humanities at Umeå University from Sweden. And she's speaking from Sweden. Her main research interests include Sami media, cultural and linguistic revitalization, and digital practices in minority and indigenous contexts. Among her recent publications is the co-authored book with Thomas Dubois entitled Sami Media and Indigenous agency in the Arctic North. And I'm sure this will be in Kopeli's resources list, so you can check that out. It's published by University of Washington Press in Seattle. The second presenter is Kimmo Granqvist from University of Helsinki and Uppsala University. He is among the leading scholars working on Romani languages. And he also has the title of docent in general linguistics and modern Greek language. So that is our second presentation. The third presentation is by Dr. Helka Rionheimo from University of Eastern Finland. And I wanted to mention the title of Dr. Granqvist's presentation. It's Finnish Romani Current Sociolinguistic Situation. Promises to be interesting, as all the panel talks here. So the third presenter is Dr. Helka Rionheimo from University of Eastern Finland. Her presentation is entitled Something Old, Something New, Something Borrowed: Karelian, Russian, and Estonian as minority languages in Finland. Dr. Rionheimo has been professor of Finnish at the University of Eastern Finland since 2018, and she's currently working as professor of Karelian language and culture. Beside Finnish, her research field includes other Finnic languages, of which Karelian has recently been her special focus. Our fourth presentation panelist is Dr. Frederika Lupke from University of Helsinki, and the presentation she's going to be giving today is entitled Vanha ryijy uusilla kuiduilla: Weaving an Old Rug with New Yarn. Dr. Lupke has been professor of African Studies at the University of Helsinki since 2019, and she is chair of AfriStudy, Africa Research Forum in Social Sciences and Humanities at the University of Helsinki, and her research and teaching focus on the description and documentation of West African languages in their cultural contexts. So we have a range of presentations coming up, and just a quick note that, of course, these are not all the languages spoken in Finland, but this scratches the surface and is the beginning. So let's get started with the panel, with the first presentation by Dr. Kopeli Kok from Umeå University. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here and to see all the greetings in the chat, people from different places joining us tonight, or today. So it's night here, it's evening here, not for you. So hopefully you can see my screen. Mm-hmm. Yes, good, thank you. I'm really happy to be here talking about the topic of multilingualism, which is a topic close to my heart for many different reasons, and talking about the Sami languages in Finland and in Sapmi, the broader area of Sapmi. So as you already know by now, I'm a professor at Umeå University, and before that I was professor at Helsinki University, so I'm a former colleague of Frederika also, but I have my PhD degree and most of my academic education in Sweden, but work with different research topic about Sami media and revitalization of like cultural and linguistic revitalization in different areas of Sapmi. As you can guess by my name and my accent, I'm not originally from the Nordic countries, but I am born and grew up in another minority language area, which is the Flemish area at the border between France and Belgium. So I actually grew up in a place where my grandparents had a different language and where place names were in other languages too. which I think now as an adult gave me some kind of explanation why I got so interested in that topic. So I wanted to mention that as part of the context for you to understand what I'm going to talk about. I am not myself fluent of Sami languages. I've studied North Sami mostly, and I've worked with, I'm really interested in narratives and oral traditions, so I've worked with Sami texts in North Sami. But today I'm gonna give you a general introduction of the different Sami languages and about the situation for multilingualism in Sapmi. I chose this title talking about Sami languages alive and kicking a bit as a response of the way we talk about indigenous and minority languages most of the time. So often we talk about endangered languages, and the Sami languages are indeed endangered. They're listed on the list of the UNESCO Atlas of Languages Endangered. They are severely endangered or critically endangered, which is part of the scale that identify languages that have few speakers and mostly speakers quite old, of the oldest generation, which makes the languages quite threatened. But at the same time, I think it's important to focus on the vitality of languages, because from the perspective of speakers and learners of Sami languages, it's not primarily about languages dying out or being in danger. It's also about revitalization and reclaiming languages. So that's my choice of title, to focus a little bit on that aspect. Also, I will not be talking only about Finland, because the national borders don't really make sense, I would say, in a Sami context. Since the Sami area is quite broad, I will show that use that in my next slide. There are no clear linguistic borders either. So we'll talk about Sapmi, and then we can talk more about Finland in the Q&A if you're interested. So let's see. Now you should be able to see a map of Sapmi, if the slideshow works as it should. So there are no official borders for the Sami area, and actually the maps can look a bit different based on different sources, and the change also depending on what kind of new historical sources or archaeological sources are found. So based on new knowledge and research. This map here is from the Swedish Sami Parliament, and it shows a little bit of an unusual perspective. I don't know if you can make sense of this map, but as a viewer, we are placed in northern Norway, so in the center of Sapmi. And what you see on your left is Finland. You can see the name Helsingfors. Since it's a Swedish map, the name is in Swedish, but it's Helsinki. And on your right, Stockholm and Oslo, so Norway and Sweden. So that's a map that questions a little bit the center periphery norm that we usually see when we place the capitals in the middle of the on the center of the map. But as you can see, Sami area includes part of Russia, the Kola Peninsula in Russia, northernmost Finland, part of Norway, and part of Sweden. Here is a different map that shows a little bit the distribution of the languages. But please remember that there is no specific borders where a language stops and another one starts, and there's been also displacement between within Sapmi. So North Sami speakers, for instance, that have moved or been displaced to other parts. So the languages would be, you will find them in different regions across Sapmi. I think it's better to talk about languages rather than dialects. The variation of the difference is often not based on linguistic considerations, mostly political considerations. But so it's from the Sami perspective, and the Sami parliaments recommend to talk about languages or varieties as in national legislations. The languages, that's a kind of language continuum. So the degree of mutual intelligibility is higher the closer you are to the next, like geographically, how close you are to the other speakers. So for instance, speakers from the Pite Sami area, number 3 on the map, and the Lule Sami area on 4 would quite easily understand each other, or between Lule Sami and North Sami. But for speakers from the southern Sami area, reddish on the map there, it will be quite difficult to have this mutual intelligibility with the Eastern Sami languages spoken in Russia, because the orthography, the alphabet is different, the grammar is different, the vocabulary is more variations between them. What makes it a bit challenging is giving that kind of overview. It's also that there are no statistics about how many speakers there are, and defining what it means to speak a language, like the degree of mastering the language, is also quite different. So that's why you see so many question marks in on my slide. But that's based on different sources, some updated, some a bit older, but trying to give you an estimation about what we can, how we can describe the community of speakers from the different languages. Also, there are no statistics on how many Sami live in Sapmi. And I think that's a difference between Nordic countries and the US, that here we cannot ask people about their ethnicity, like in census and for official statistics, because that's something that is described in law, like it could be discriminatory, something that's questioned from in different, in research. We can also talk more about that in the Q&A, but it means that it's quite difficult to give you figures about what we are talking about. So just remember, it's just estimations. The Sami parliaments give an approximate number of between 80,000 and 100,000 Sami living in Sapmi today. But it's also difficult to know how many actually have this, describe themselves as Sami, since self-ascription is also an important component when we talk about ethnic identity. So there's a small community of South Sami speakers in Sweden and Norway, about 700. Umi Sami is a really small language with about maybe 20,000 speakers. And Piti Sami also rather small. What's interesting with Umi Sami and Piti Sami is that the languages, the written language, the orthography, has been acknowledged, like has an official orthography only recently, a few years ago, which means that quite a lot's happening now with new books being printed, right, for children to have mother tongue education in Umi and Piti Sami. And that kind of things, giving some more vitality into the small community of language speakers or of the generation that want to reclaim the language. Luli Sami is, compared to Umi and Piti Sami, a bit bigger, about 800,000. And North Sami is the largest of the Sami languages. So when you, if you have the chance to hear or read something in Sami, in a film or a newspaper, most of the time what you'll see in North Sami, because that's the largest, the bigger language. In Finland, we have Inari Sami, and Skol Sami, spoken also in Russia. It's quite difficult to know about Akala Sami, how many speakers there are. Some sources say that the last speaker died in 2003. Other sources say that there might be a few, like a couple of speakers from the oldest generation that can use a language in dialogue with Kildin Sami speakers, since the languages are quite close to one another. And there is a language center and a grammar in Akala Sami supporting those who want to learn or reclaim the language. Kildin Sami is also spoken in Russia. The number of speakers is said to decrease rapidly, but there are some revitalization measures also being taken for encouraging younger speakers to keep using the language. And Ter Sami also spoken is a small community of written language in Russia. So if we want to understand why there are so few speakers, we need to look back in history. And I won't give you deep lecture about history in the Nordic countries in relation to minorities. That would take too much time, but I try to give you an overview about the changes of perceptions and attitudes to minority languages and to multilingualism. So the language as threatened is partly an inheritance of colonialism. During the 20th century, the states in the Nordic countries pursued a conscious assimilation policy that caused many Sami to lose their mother tongue. So children, for instance, were not allowed to speak at school. If it was not forbidden, it could still be punished. And there was a strong stigmatization for this generation when they grew up. So in the 60s and 70s still, many Sami parents did not speak Sami at home with their children because they had negative experience and being stigmatized because of the language, and they wanted to protect their children from that. There was also almost no education in the Sami languages. So not having the language at school meant that you didn't have any access to other sources in the language in most areas of Sapmi, not all, but most of them. It meant that the parents spoke the majority language with the children, and that's a generation, 1 to 2 generations were deprived of their mother tongue. There was also a strong monolingual norm. In some ways there still is, but there was also this idea that the child could only learn and master one language. So for a child to success in society, to get a job, to get education and a job, the belief was that the national language should be prioritized. Learning Sami would have negative effect on the possibility for the children to success in life. Since then, research has shown that it's quite the opposite, actually. Languages support one another. So having different languages at home, for instance, can actually support language development and language acquisition of more languages. So things have changed quite a lot, but politics and ideology have left traces in the language shift that we've seen. Later, there was what we see now. It's a new era for minority languages, and that are officially recognized as minority languages also. One key element there was the European Charter for Regional Minority Languages that entered into force in Finland and Norway in 1998, in Sweden a bit later in 2000. Russia has not ratified this legislation yet. There have been also different texts from the UNESCO or from the UN that also support indigenous people and their languages. For instance, the Declaration on the Right of Indigenous People and the Convention for Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage. And in this case, language is mentioned as a vehicle for intangible cultural heritage. So language is specifically mentioned there. UN also done different kind of works working for promoting cultural and linguistic diversity. And on European level, there's also a lot going on with promoting multilingualism. Based on these different European and international texts, there have been national legislations, or there are national legislation, promoting and protecting minority languages, and Sami is official minority languages in Norway, Sweden, and Finland, which mean that there are defined areas in which the minority language speaking population has a right to use the language in spoken and written contact with local municipalities and different authorities. Also that population has a right to education in the language, and that the state or the municipality has to make conscious effort to promote and protect and finance also education or cultural activity in language. And these activities are mostly directed to children, like preschool, but also young children, and in elderly care. On the slide, you see the Sami flag, which is the common flag for all Sami people across Sapmi, official flag since 1986. There is also a national song and a national day celebrated as February 6 every year since 1993. So lots have happened for Sami population and Sami speakers across time. Now I'll give some, how much time do I have? Helena, I keep talking.
Yes, you've got a good 5 minutes. Yes,
a good 5 minutes. Okay, good.
Yes.
Because now I wanted to give you some examples about different areas for language support, language use and language support. In talking about politics or political organization, there is a Nordic Sami Council since 1956 already, and Sami parliaments in the 90s in Norway, Sweden, and Finland, with responsibility for supporting languages, among other things. What you see in the right corner of my screen here, it's a logo for the Sami Parliament of Finland. In North Sami, Inari Sami is called Sami, and in the smaller text is in Finnish. There are also language centers in Russia where there is no Sami parliaments supporting activities, even if it's not, like for instance, in Akala Sami, there's a few speakers. We don't even know if there still are speakers, there's no teaching, but there are activities and grammars and audio recordings to make it possible for persons in the communities to listen and maybe learn the language. In Sweden, Norway, Finland, there's a right to mother tongue education, which is often quite limited time for in the curriculum, but they give the right to children to learn the language. There are also language courses offered in at university, even if not only for university students, and in different organization, association. Media play an important role too. There are a limited number of broadcasted hours in Sami, but there are some. Daily news, for instance, on radio, and not least social media play a significant role today. First of all, we should remember that social media are public spaces. It's a domain where an area where languages can be visible for more people, can attract more people, and where you can also create positive attitudes to languages. There's been, for instance, campaigns on Instagram encouraging young speakers to learn the language or to share their journey in reclaiming the language. Groups on Facebook or speakers discussing vocabularies or resources, or just asking questions about how about a new word or new phenomena. Been also use of hashtags on Twitter for language learners, giving support to each other in learning the language and sharing resources. On national media, there's still limited representativity of Sami individuals and languages, but this has been changing. So in Sweden, for instance, it has changed drastically. Now it's more common to see on television, to hear on radio, Sami cultural workers or artists, and it's I think it's the same thing happening a bit more slowly in Finland. In terms of cultural expressions, there have been also films promoting Sami culture and using the Sami language. Some of them have been also awarded and quite known internationally. You might have heard, for instance, of the Pathfinder from 1987, I think it was, the Cartagena Rebellion in 2008, and more recently, Sami Blood from 2016. I would add those in the list of resources if you're interested. Music also, and not only the traditional singing, traditional yoik, but also modern song genres and how Sami language are used when singing, which is quite important for language renewal and for younger generations. So for instance, we have, you can hear rap in Indonesian Sami or hip hop in North Sami, I will also share resources about that. I added also handicraft on my slide, and you can see also in the corner there the label for Sami Dodji, which is an official label that acknowledges artists and guarantee the use of traditional methods and values of Sami handicraft. So when you buy a piece of handicraft with this label, you can be sure that it's been done according to traditional methods by a Sami artist. Linguistic landscapes, so the way how visible languages are around us is also changing with an increasing visibility. That's partly in relation to the legislation. When the municipality, for instance, can sign the name of the city, or in libraries can use the different languages and would include one of the Sami languages. But also, it's also used by different cities and different parts of society. And that's why I added this picture that I like quite a lot. It's a graffiti on, I think it's called a distribution box that you can see in the city. That's a photo I took in Jokkmokk in the kind of cultural center in the Lule Sami area in Sweden. And the text here starts in Lule Sami, Dunle no, like you are so. Then comes an abbreviation in English, on the F word in English. And then the last word is in Swedish, cert like cute, which means that you will be cute. So using 3 languages on a graffiti in the center of Jokkmokk, which I think is also an interesting illustration of multilingualism in Sapmi today. In terms of higher education research, there is Sami University in Northern Norway. There are Sami research centers in Norway, Sweden, and Finland. You can earn a PhD degree in Sami studies, and there is research funding specifically dedicated to Sami research in Norway, for instance. Something happening on my screen. Can you still see my slide?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So
sorry,
it's just
language support.
It's just there. My screen. Fine. In terms of research, there's also ongoing discussions about research policy. For instance, if the Sami parliaments should have more to say in terms of research, discussions about ethical guidelines. And most of the discussions are going about there's a need for a higher degree of involvement from the Sami community in research. On the top of that, I also want to add that a lot of private initiatives from teachers, cultural workers, associations. And what we see then when the lack of institutional support, other initiatives are coming in, which is also in terms of vitality of language is something that is really giving hope. So briefly, when we talk about revitalization of Sami languages, first of all, revitalization is both about culture and language, because they go together. The main change, I think, that we can for sure say that has happened is the change of attitudes to language, where young generation is proud of being part of Sami community, learning Sami or being a Sami speaker. And we know from research within the field of revitalization that change of attitude and positive attitudes to language is really key in the process of reclaiming languages. Intangible cultural heritage is also important in this context, because what's included in that is also a relation to places, stories, and histories, and all of that is also embedded in language. And something that is key in this context is the intergenerational transmission of language. So a lot of measures for promoting languages are target young children and also elderly. And we need also to have more of this intergenerational transmission of language because of the loss of language that several generations have suffered. So that's something quite difficult to achieve. but quite key if we want to success in revitalization. Before we can say that we're there in revitalization, there is also a couple of challenges that need to be addressed and obstacles for revitalization. For instance, the lack of financial resources for like long-term investment in these different initiatives that have been taking place for supporting languages, and the lack of teachers and translators and other key actors in working with languages. And there's also still lack of knowledge in the society, and that's in common for all the Nordic countries. So these are also traces left by colonialism, like language barriers, difficulty to learn a language because of stigmatization that has been in for previous generation, that also polarization and potential conflicts about land rights, for instance, and exploitations. So even though the Sami languages are alive and kicking, there is still a lot to be done, and also a lot of knowledge that needs to go out to society about multilingualism and about the situation for the multilingual speakers of Sapmi. Here are a few links, few resources, and I will share more with you about the music and the film that I mentioned. And I stop sharing my screen and get back to you. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Koch. This is really fascinating. So let's move on. We've got some good questions already for you, but we'll save those till afterwards. And our next presenter is Dr. Kimmo Granqvist from University of Helsinki and Uppsala University, and we'll hear about the sociolinguistic situation of the Finnish Roma and Romani language. So the floor is yours.
Thank you a lot, and thank you for inviting me. And I will now share my PowerPoint. Yes, my name is Kimmo Granqvist. I have been working on Romani and above all Finnish Romani since 1997 at the Research Institute for the Languages of Finland until 2011, and then since 2012, beginning of 2012 at the University of Helsinki. I have also been in Sweden at Södertörn University, and now currently I'm also a visiting professor at the Uppsala University. Well, I have published a lot about the grammar and structure of Romani, its dialectology, but also its sociolinguistic issues. So today I'm going to speak about a number of issues. I'm going to start with a brief introduction about Finnish Romani and Romani dialectology. Then I'm going to speak about language policies, something about Finnish Romani as a mother tongue and Romani competence. And I might skip the language contact issue also, even if it's interesting in terms of language shift and language use. If there's time, I'm going to say something about an issue which is it's related to the thing about Romani competence and language codes, namely Romani-based mixed varieties and Romani Finnish if there's time. But I will start. Roma have been documented in Finland since 1559. That's the sure document, earliest sure document of Finnish Romani. Well, it has been suggested an earlier migration from Estonia to Finland in 1515. And there are currently approximately 10,000 Finnish Roma in Finland and 3,000 to 5,000 Finnish Roma in Sweden. Well, due to the reasons of data protection legislation, which forbids both in Finland and Sweden combining statistics on ethnic basis, we do not know the exact number of Finnish Roma. And in Finland, well, there are Roma all over the country, but most Finnish Roma live in the cities in southern Finland. So if you think about the map of Romani is spoken all over Europe, and I don't think there is almost any country in Europe that doesn't have Roma. So Romani dialects have been divided in kind of consensus classification grid in a number of groups, which you see in the map on the right-hand side. There are dialect groups in the Balkans and Southern Europe. Then there's a group of Central Romani, which I'm not going to say anything about now. Then you have the grayish and the green areas there, which refer to Northern Romani. And the one which are in, I don't know whether it's gray or blue, it represents the so-called Northwestern dialect group, in which currently vital Romani dialects belong only, actually Sinti, that's its center is in German-speaking areas of Europe, and then Finnish Romani. Well, you might wonder why, for instance, the languages of Norwegian race and Swedish race isn't on the map, and the reason is that they have lost their original grammatical framework. It has been replaced with the inflectional grammar of, for instance, Norwegian and Swedish. And Finnish Romani really shares some conservative features and innovations that characterize even other Northern Romani dialects. So it's basically strongly a Northern dialect. But I'm going to turn actually after this brief introduction to Finnish Romani and the Finnish language policies. Well, if we look at, currently Finnish Romani, I can see there's a fairly strong level of legal protection provided to Finnish Romani. After the 1995 amendment of basic rights in Finland already guaranteed the right to everybody to maintain and develop their own language and culture. That was actually reiterated in the Finnish constitution from 2000. And then there's a bulk of other Finnish legislation which actually mentioned the Romani language and protects its use in different areas of the society. For instance, it's mentioned in school legislation, childcare legislation. There's a law on the broadcast company, Yle, which mentions that also there should be also radio broadcasting in Romani, and indeed there are news in Romani. So then Finland ratified the European Charter for Regional and Minority Language, Regional or Minority Languages in 1998, and in the same year the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. Well, both the Charter for Regional or Minority Languages and the Framework Convention mention linguistic minorities. And as for the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages, Finland has ratified Romani as it has two parts. Maybe it has the part two which is fairly general, and the part three which is more restrictive. And Finland has ratified the Charter for Romani as when it comes to part 2 only. So that's, but nevertheless, Finland has ratified the Charter for Romani. Then we have a number of national documents pertaining to the use and status of Romani. From 2009, we have the Romani Language Policy Program, which was published by the Research Institute for the Languages of Finland, and mainly the Romani Language Board, which is the official Romani language planning organ, I would say, since 1997. And then there's actually the content of the Romani language policy program was included in the first Finnish national policy on Roma for the years 2009 and 2017. The second national Roma policy was a bit different. It had different kind of contents regarding the language than the first one. Anyway, the national Romani policies continue to try to protect the Romani language and work for its stronger status. Well, Romani is taught at our comprehensive schools, at some comprehensive schools, not at all, and it has been a teaching subject at the University of Helsinki. Well, I give here 2 kind of years because it started as an unofficial experiment in 2009 at the Department of Languages and Culture of Asia and Africa, whereas it was officially established as a minor subject in 2012, and it has continued like that since then. If we think about Finnish Romani as a mother tongue, well, first of all, it's seriously endangered. Well, Artur Teslev, which was the big name of Romani linguistics in Finland at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, wrote in an article that the true mother tongue of the Finnish Roma is Finnish. So and that all Roma know better Finnish than Romani. And that was repeated actually by Katri Vuorela and Lars Purin in 1998 in their article that stating that all Finnish Roma speak Finnish as their mother tongue. And according to Henry Hedman in 2000, his survey from 2009, well, he also said that the mother tongue of virtually all his informants, he interviewed some 300 Roma, was Finnish. Romani was the second mother tongue of 11% of the Roma he interviewed, and Swedish rarely. So if you think about the diagram on the right-hand side, it shows actually it refers to the home language of the Roma. It's striking in a way that it shows that 0% of the Roma use exclusively Romani as their mother tongue, as their home language. Well, more than half of the Finnish Roma use Finnish only at home. Then there's a little bit more than a third, maybe 1/3 of the Roma who use both Finnish and Romani at home. And then there's a small group speaking Finnish and Swedish, and a little bit bigger group speaking Finnish and Swedish and Romani at home. So that's basically the situation. Well, if we look at on the other, because the self-assessments of Roma regarding their Romani competence have been surveyed in several times between 1954 and 2009. And actually here the results are quite interesting if you look at the self-assessments. They show that they show that very little difference. In fact, there's a kind of I would say there's a difference from year to year in the group of between 30 and 59 years, where we can see that there's a decrease in at least satisfactory command of Romani, according to the self-assessment. But I would say there are, on the other hand, it would look like the young Roma would know Romani better than, in their own opinion, than they did in 2079. Another striking feature here is if you look at the proportion of the Roma not knowing Romani at all, according to the self-assessment. Here it looks like there would be a decrease. There would be lesser and less number of Roma not knowing Romani at all. Well, that could be explained on many, many things, how the surveys are conducted. It could be explained by what is understood as knowing Romani, because the criteria might be changing with time to become maybe looser and looser. I don't know. And in fact, then if you think about Romani competence, well, we know that the insights in the Romani show there's a considerable variation. Some are fluent, others know almost nothing. Many Roma consider themselves as semi-competent in Romani. They might be able to mention other, usually older members of the community, who they consider to be more fluent than themselves. And even again, if you go to fluent speaker, they say that Roma that had passed away were more competent than them. And generally, Romani is considered highly attrited at best. It's an oral language of the Roma used within the family, as elsewhere in Europe also. It has, if you think about its written usage, well, it's late and you can see it's limited. We can say that the literature in Romani started in the 1970s. You can see it on the diagram on the right-hand side. There has been an increase of published pages in Romani. That's about a big reason. That, of course, is that the dictionaries have been published and teaching materials have been published after 1990. So its functional expansion is also late and limited. There is it has little public use. It's still mostly a home language for the Roma, used by the Roma in Roma to communicate within the Romani community. And well, Romani has been codified formally since if you think about since the early 70s, if you speak about the orthography. The other types of codification starting to create a linguistic norm started in 1997, when Romani Language Board was established as part of activities of the Research Center of the Languages of Finland. On the other hand, as there's little written usage that would actually slow down the language change. There are little conservative forces. It's a language that changes very quickly, and there's a huge amount of lectal variation. You can even say that every speaker of Finnish Romani has his or her own grammar. It's if you think about the functions of written Finnish Romani, well, it's rather emblematic. There's a result that suggests that that actually very many Finnish Roma do not read the gospel text in Romani translations. I would say Luke's gospel was distributed to all Romani homes free of charge. So it's Roma. It's available to Roma. It's accessible to the Roma. So, but nevertheless, you can see that the proportion of Roma who read it often is very small. And interesting, this actually correlates with the percentage of Roma who can understand it well. Well, you can see that there's maybe 1/3 of the Roma have admitted that it's difficult to understand and comprehensive, whatever it means. That's also 1/3. But that reflects the problem of written Romani. Written Romani is quite different from what Romani are used to listening and reading. So they find it difficult to understand, generally speaking. Then the same actually continues if you look at the proportion of the Roma who listen to there are weekly radio news in Romani, who listen to the Romani news. It's only about 18% who listen to them. And and also here you can see the percentage of the Roma who understand the radio news well is less than 20%, which means that they are hard to listen to, hard to understand for the Roma. There have been attempts to revitalize Romani. And there's an official recommendation of orthography from our Ministry of Education since 1971, and that actually has been used in most printed publications in Romani since then. Kind of official codification has been carried out since 1997 at the Research Institute for the Languages of Finland by the Romani Language Board. How much time do I have, actually? I should ask.
5 minutes, and then we'll move on.
How much?
5 minutes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you. And actually the official codification they have been mostly working on issues of Romani lexicon, trying to enhance the lexical resources of Romani, and in addition also they have been working on to codify the grammar. Well, that was a big important part of the work ever since the beginning of the Romani language sport in 1997. And actually after 2011, much of the codification work has been based on my small kind of descriptive grammar of Romani, which has served as a basis for much of teaching and codification. Well, formal attempts to revitalize Romani in the situation which it is seriously endangered and used very little by the Roma themselves, have been actually since the early 2000s funded by the Finnish Cultural Society and the Swedish Suomen Kulttuurirahasto and the Swedish one, also Svenska Kulturfondet. And the early first language revitalization project resulted in activities that the Roma called language nest, but actually more resembled language clubs. That was an activity that was first funded from the project, I think, until some 2005 or 6, and thereafter by the National Board of Education. But that fund actually, I think, in 2016 that funding was cut. Currently, there is a formal revitalization program of Finnish Romani being prepared by the National Board of Education, but actually that's not yet ready. So I do not participate in that job actually. So I have not seen the results by now. I don't know whether I should say. Perhaps I skip the language contact thing because it's. I go to my conclusion because I do not have so much time. So Finnish Romani, it's a Northern Romani dialect. It's related to a dialect which we call Sinti, which has a kind of it's an innovation center in German-speaking areas of Europe, basically Germany, and it's also, I could say, it could be related to Northeastern Romani dialects spoken in the Baltic countries. That's something we are actually researching. There's a connection of Finnish Romani with Baltic Romani. It's as I have shown, it's the situation interesting because it's fairly well protected, I would say, by national language policies and language legislation. So, but in fact, at the same time, it's seriously endangered and it's attrited, and it's mostly only used by the Romani community at home. It has little public use. It's it has strong influences from Finnish. It's as a language. It's highly symbiotic with Finnish, which I didn't actually speak about. I should here, nevertheless, mention that there's kind of continuum between fully fledged inflected Romani and a variety similar to the language of Swedish and Norwegian Resande, which is to language form, which actually has a Finnish, uses Romani words but a Finnish grammar. Well, I think I will stop here, and I will be open to questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Granqvist. We have a wish from an attendee in the chat function, and I was thinking maybe we could bring this up now. We would like to hear you say perhaps a sentence in Romani.
Okay. In Finnish Romani, you mean? Mangonauhin Kimmo. Me som Romani Chimbako Sikiboskiro Tarodiboskiro. My name is Kimmo. I'm a researcher and teacher of Romani.
Can you say it again?
Mangonauhin Kimmo. My name is Kimmo. Me som Rodiboskiro Tasikiboskiro. Sorry. Me som Romani Chimbako Rodiboskiro Tasikiboskiro. I'm a researcher and teacher of Romani language.
Wonderful, thank you. And we have a comment already that's beautiful. Thank you. So
yeah, I can see it.
Yes, so wonderful. And we will move on. We have the next panelist, Helga Rionheimo from University of Eastern Finland, and she will be talking about something old, something new, something borrowed, and this translates into Karelian, Russian, and Estonian as minority languages in Finland. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just take this screen from Kimmo now. I hope you are seeing my slides. and hearing me also. Hi, everybody. Greetings from Joensuu, Eastern Finland, and thank you for inviting me here. This is an interesting and exciting way to spend one Saturday night here in Finland. And when I was thinking about the title for my presentation, and I looked at the other titles, and I wanted a bit more colorful title for myself too. And the combination of these three languages somehow reminded me of this old rhyme that describes what a bride should wear in her wedding. And I'm going to talk to you about an old minority and two new minorities in Finland. And of course, when languages meet, there occurs borrowing. And I'm going to give just a short overview of these languages, and the focus will be in Karelian because that is the language I'm working with right now. And let's begin by speaking about Karelia as a place. And here's a map that shows the Finnish-Russian borderland, and it illustrates the fact that there are and there have formerly been several places that are named Karelia. And there are three areas I would like you to keep in mind during this presentation. First, there is the Republic of Karelia in the Russian Federation here. These are the traditional areas where Karelian has been spoken. And second, there are two Karelias in Finland, the provinces of North Karelia, where I live, Joensuu here, and the province of South Karelia here. And in these provinces, Karelian was actually spoken a few hundred years ago, but it has been replaced by Finnish. And third, I would like you to note the areas that are located in the middle, Karelian Isthmus and border Karelia. These areas used to belong to Finland until World War II, and then they were ceded to the Soviet Union, and the residents were resettled in other places in Finland. In Karelian Isthmus, people spoke Finnish, and in border Karelia, they mostly spoke Karelian. And when we think about this map and also about all the historical layers that lie there below the surface, it is perhaps not so surprising to find out that there are much variation in what Finns think about the Karelian language, or if they know anything about it. So what do Finns mean by Karelian? It is very common to use the term Karelian dialect to refer to the Finnish dialects that are spoken in Finland's North Karelia or South Karelia. And older people in Finland may use the same term when they are speaking about the Finnish dialect that was spoken in the Karelian Isthmus before World War II. And furthermore, what we now call the Karelian language was for several decades presented and treated as a dialect of Finnish. And this has created a myth that is still living among Finns. And finally, if Finns mention Karelian as a separate language, they usually think that it is spoken only in Russia, or that it is not a living language anymore. It has died out. And clearly, before I go any further, I have to define what I mean by the Karelian language. And here are a few basic facts. Karelian is a language of its own. It is not a dialect of Finnish. However, it is a close relative of Finnish, and it is particularly close to the Eastern Finnish dialects. Karelian has traditionally been spoken in Russia, but also in Finland near the Russian border. And finally, Karelian is nowadays severely endangered, and there are language activists who are working to revitalize and reclaim the language in a similar way than the Sami people. It is customary to divide Karelian into two main dialects, Karelian proper, also known as Vienna Karelian and White Sea Karelian, and Livvi Karelian. And Karelian proper is further divided into two subdialects, which are North Karelian. Now I mixed things up a little bit. So the two main dialects are Karelian proper and Livvi dialect. And the Karelian proper is divided into subdialects, which are North Karelian, also known as Vienna Karelian and White Sea Karelian, and then South Karelian. And in this map, you can see the traditional areas of these dialects, which are in Russia. But as I said, all these dialects have been spoken in Finland too. First, there is the area, the historical border Karelia around here. It used to belong to Finland. Then there have been a few Karelian villages in the province of Kainuu, north here, around here. And furthermore, after World War II, the residents of border Karelia were resettled around Finland. And since then, Karelian has been a non-regional language in Finland. And of course, it is not visible in this map. At this point, you may be wondering, what does Karelian look or sound like if it's close to Eastern Finnish dialects, but still different enough to be considered a separate language? And here is a short text in 3 dialects, North Karelian, South Karelian, and Livi Karelian. And we can listen to the samples. I hope I remembered to share sound. I think I have.
Karjalan kieli on itsenäinen kieli. Se ei ole mityskänä Suomen murre. Karjalaksi paissaa Suomessa tai Venäjällä. Karjala on uhanalainen kieli.
Karjalan kieli on itsenäinen kieli, ei Suomen murre. Karjalaksi paissaa Suomessa tai Venäjällä. Karjala on varavonalainen kieli.
Karjalan kieli on itsenäinen kieli. Se ei ole nimittyinen Suomen murre. Karjalaksi paistaa Suomessa tai Venäjällä. Karjala on varavonalainen kieli.
And these were my wonderful colleagues from the University of Eastern Finland, Olga Karlova, Katerina Balamo, and Natalia Kilojeva, who are working as a language experts in our revitalization project.
Karjalan kieli on
Karjalan kieli on
It's always difficult to move from the slide that has these samples. Okay, let's continue. When we see different maps of Karelian, they usually look like this one or the previous ones. It seems that Karelian is spoken on a rather large area, and these maps give an impression of vitality. But we have to note that these maps usually don't illustrate the present situation, but they show where Karelian was spoken traditionally about 100 years ago. And a lot has happened during the last century. And at the beginning of the 21st century, the language map looks quite different. And you can see that there are many differences. First, the Karelian areas have shrunk and they have become fragmented. And second, if you look at the area of border Karelia here, it is not marked as a Karelian area anymore. And third, the residents of border Karelia were resettled in Finland in many areas, and these yellow dots here in the map of Finland show the places where the Karelian speakers are mostly concentrated. The latest estimates of the number of Karelian speakers is about 11,000 in Finland and 25,000 in Russia, but the number of the speakers is very difficult to estimate, and it is very probable that the real number is going down right now from even from these numbers. Why has Karelian become endangered in Finland? It is a result of several intertwined factors, of which I will present here 3. The main reason is, of course, the loss of the traditional homelands in border Karelia and the resettlement that led to a situation where Karelian-speaking communities were scattered. Another reason was that the Karelians were met with negative attitudes. They were seen as foreigners or intruders, and they were marginalized and discriminated. And the third factor is that Finland's official language policy has neglected Karelian almost totally. There's no language legislation concerning Karelian. Karelian is not taught in schools. It is not protected in any way. And the combination of these factors has led to cultural and linguistic assimilation. And of course, linguistic assimilation was facilitated by the fact that Karelian is so closely related to Finnish. It was easy for Karelians to learn Finnish. And very often, the language was not transmitted to the younger generations at home. And this is the way the vicious circle of language endangerment begins. Children are not learning the language at home. The situation for Karelian is severe in Finland, but Finnish Karelians have not lost hope. Language activists started different forms of revitalization already in the 1990s, and many things have been done. The language has been activated in homes and in language courses. Karelian has been a minor subject at the University of Eastern Finland since 2009. There have been attempts to improve the official status of Karelian. Literature and other texts have been published in Karelian. There has been Karelian language art and music. There are radio news in Karelian, things like that. But what is characteristic to this, to the revitalization of Karelian is that these activities have mainly been carried out by language activists and NGOs, and the official support from the state of Finland has been very limited until the recent years. But for a few years, there has been some funding from the state of Finland, and it was first managed by an NGO, but last year it was directed via our university, and we launched a 2-year revitalization project. And when we were starting the project last spring, we made an open query for Karelian speakers and friends of Karelian and asked them, what does Karelian need to revive? And we got the following answers. Karelian needs to be learned and used, and especially we need children acquiring Karelian. We need Karelian people with enthusiasm and motivation, and people should work in cooperation with each other and have high community spirit. Karelian needs the present and the future. This means that it is not enough to just maintain the old language and old traditions, but we need to bring Karelian to modern world. There should be more books, movies, music, art, and so on in Karelian. And in addition, Karelian needs visibility and publicity in Finland. The Finns clearly need more information about Karelian. They need to see that this language exists and that it needs support. And it is necessary to raise the status of Karelian in the Finnish society. And what is also needed is an official status for Karelian. And of course, revitalization needs money, and Karelian needs a permanently funded, long-standing revitalization program. And this list pretty much sums up the things that are needed if we wish to save a language. And some of these are easier to do, some of these are very hard to achieve, but try we must, because now it is a critical time. And if there are enough people who are willing to work hard, Karelian still has a future in Finland. And what we have been doing at the UEF, University of Eastern Finland, our language experts have taught Karelian in our university, and they have supported other teachers. And this has been, of course, done remotely in the present conditions. And when we organized a poll for the Karelian word for the year 2001, the winner was Loitto-opastus, which means online teaching. Our experts have also organized informal Karelian language clubs. For example, there is a a club in Joensuu named Pakinpertti, Paginapertti, or Pakinapirtti, depending on the dialect. Here's the name of the club in all the 3 dialects on the icing of a cake that somebody baked for their meeting. And the experts have also been preparing teaching materials, for example, small glossaries, dialogues, videos for other teachers of Karelian. This is very much needed. And they have done terminological work, creating new words for modern purposes. For example, loitto-opastus is such a word. And together with Karelian associations and language activists and language learners, we have organized Karelian-related events in order to raise the awareness of Karelian. These have mostly taken place in social media, but I have here a couple of real-life examples. There was a shop that added tags in Karelian for the clothes they were selling. And at our university, some signs were translated into Karelian. So here's Smoke-Free Campus. It is in Karelian, Savutoi Campus. And most importantly, all this is done in close cooperation with Karelian speaking community. And we have funding until the end of this year. And of course, we strongly hope that the financial aid from the state of Finland will continue in the future. I was also asked to tell something about Russian and Estonian in Finland, and I can understand that you are interested in these languages. I'm by no means I'm by no means an expert on these languages, but I try to give you a broad overview of them. These are the languages of Finland's eastern and southern neighbors, and they are, of course, 2 very different neighbors. Because Estonian is smaller than Finnish, and Russian in turn is a huge language, one of the biggest languages in the world. And another difference is that Estonian is closely related to Finnish, whereas Russian belongs to a different language family and it is written with a different alphabet. Finland has never been a monolingual country since we have 2 official languages and a handful of small domestic languages. Karelian is one of them, but the number of foreign language speakers was low until the 1990s. And here we can see the share of the speakers, the share of the speakers of languages other than Finnish and Swedish was less than 1%. In year 1990. And 30 years later, the share of Finnish speakers has decreased and the number of the speakers of the other languages has grown. And this is a result of growing migration and arrival of refugees from several conflict areas. And what is interesting here for the purposes of this presentation is that the number of Russian speakers has grown rather dramatically, and the same has happened for the Estonian speakers. And these are now the 2 biggest foreign languages in Finland. Russian in Finland can be considered both an old and a new minority language. The old minority groups arrived in Finland in the 1800s, and in early 1900s, Finland was then an autonomous Grand Duchy in the Russian Empire. And in addition, there were Russian people visiting Finland at the time. For example, there were summer guests in the Karelian Isthmus. And then after the October Revolution in 1917, and after Finland had declared independent, there were refugees coming from Russia to Finland. But we should note that a significant group among these refugees came from Russian Karelia, and they were actually Karelian speakers. And then a new phase began at the beginning of 1990s after the collapse of the Soviet Union. A new migration wave emerged then and has been growing all the time. And maybe I should mention that in addition to migration, tourism from Russia has been common, or at least it was before the pandemic. And of course, before the current crisis, we don't know about the future. And here's an interesting map. It compares the number of Swedish-speaking and Russian-speaking inhabitants in Finland. So now we forget Finnish and the other languages here. The violet color marks the municipalities where there are more Swedish speakers. They are in West and in southern Finland. And brown marks the areas where there are more Russian speakers, almost everywhere else. And it can be seen that Russian speakers dominate in many municipalities in Finland, and especially here in central Finland and eastern Finland. The majority of Russian speakers live in the capital region here in Helsinki and in other big cities, but there are also many immigrants in eastern Finland. And for example, in Joensuu, it is very common to hear Russian when you are walking on the streets. And you can also sometimes see Russian language in Joensuu. There are shops that serve customers in Russian and they advertise in Russian. And for example, in a large supermarket, there are signs that are in Russian. And then I have one last example. It is actually a personal memory. There is a Russian-Finnish comprehensive school in Joensuu, and my daughter went to this school about 10 or 15 years ago. And I still have this old T-shirt that has their slogan, ISK Harasho, which combines Finnish and Russian. And then the migration from Estonia. It has followed a very similar pattern compared to the migration from Russia. First, there was a rather moderate migration wave at the beginning of the 1900s, and more intensive migration began in the mid-1980s, and it increased dramatically in the early 1990s after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the restoration of independent Estonia. And then the third wave happened after Estonia had joined the European Union, and it became easy to move from one EU country to another. Estonians are spread all over the country, but like most minorities, they are still especially concentrated near Helsinki and the other larger cities. In addition to this more or less permanent migration, we have to point out that there is quite a large group of Estonia workers and students who are commuting between Estonia and Finland. So they are not staying permanently in Finland, but travel between these two countries. But we have also to note that there is remigration to Estonia. And this figure shows that in 2017, the number of Estonians going back to Estonia was actually bigger than that of the Estonians moving to Finland. This phenomenon has been explained by the proximity of Estonia. The Estonians have maintained close ties to their homeland, and so they are easily willing to move back. And finally, I wanted to show you a few examples of how Estonian language is visible in Finland. And here I have to thank my helpful Facebook friends for these examples. The first one is a public transport sign in Helsinki. Here the text about wearing a mask is in Estonian, in Russian, in Somali and Arabic. And these are the biggest foreign languages in Helsinki. And this picture is from Asian restaurant in Helsinki, and the instructions for washing one's hands are in Estonian. And the person who sent this to me said that there were no instructions in Finnish, which was rather interesting. They had this text only in Estonian. And this is a handwritten note from a place where Estonian construction workers were renovating a building. It says, "Who works on Sundays?" And this one is an advertisement of a school in Helsinki. It offers bilingual education in Finnish and in Estonian. And this is it says in Estonian, "Did you know that in Helsinki children can learn also in Estonian?" And the last one, these are posters of the Estonian parliamentary election in 2015. They were placed in Helsinki. There are so many Estonian voters living or working in Helsinki that this party extended its campaign to Finland. And I think I have now used my time here. So I thank you all for your attention. Kiitos, spasibo, aitäh.
Kiitos, thank you, Helga. This is just so informative and really, really great. And you covered a lot of ground there with 3 languages. So we will move on to our final presentation by Dr. Frederika from University of Helsinki with the title "Vanha ryijy uusilla kuiduilla, weaving an old rug with new yarn." And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Helena, and thank you to FinnFest USA for putting together this wonderful webinar series, and also to my co-presenters this tonight and also last week. I learned tremendously much because I'm relatively new to Finland. I arrived half a year before COVID struck. So I'm still finding my way around Finnish multilingualism. And my title is inspired by the famous Finnish ryijy, the very emblematic rug that stands for Finnish tradition and crafts. And I want to use it as a metaphor. We have already seen that the Finnish ryijy, if we look at it as a metaphor for multilingualism in the area that became Finland and in the Northern region, that it's a very multilingual carpet woven together by multilingual people, bringing languages, being multilingual, mixing languages, using languages. And so I would like to start with this metaphor of the multilingual ryijy. This is a very old one from 1797. But I want to talk about some new strands that have been added to it. And as Helena said at the beginning, it's the latest strands, actually, the newest yarn that has been added to the picture, talking about African languages and how they are used in Finland today. And of course, I have to also start with some statistics. Here I've given you a little overview of the most common nationalities of African immigrants to Finland. And this is a very new trend, actually, that we have sizable African immigration to Finland. Before the mid of the 20th century, migration from Africa was mainly confined to individuals. Before the mid-19th century, almost always of enslaved people who were forcibly removed from Africa, including, I don't know anybody on the territory of present-day Finland, but for instance, the great-grandfather of the very famous Russian poet, Alexander Pushkin, was kidnapped as a child and offered as a gift to the Tsar. So we have forcibly removed people before the 19th century. Then until the mid-20th century, we have individuals, for instance, students, but also Afro-Europeans who served, for instance, in the German army. And then from 1990, we see a bigger influx of refugees, in particular Somalians from 1990 onwards, when an authoritarian regime was toppled in Somalia and a civil war broke out with consequences that are lasting until today. And so we see that the Somalis lead the statistics and constitute the highest contingent of refugees and migrants from sub-Saharan Africa. And you see there are many Nigerians, many immigrants from the Democratic Republic of Congo, but really people from all over the African continent. And this is not an exhaustive list. I cut it off in the low hundreds. My slide is not moving, but you're seeing my slides right now, I hope. Yes.
Yes, yes, we see them. Yeah.
So that I don't know what is going on.
Africans in Finland today.
Yes, but there now it's okay. There we are. So okay, so the rui is changing and it's taking new strands from all kinds of African fabrics. And here you see an African fabric that I like to use in this context, because this is kente cloth from Ghana, a West African country. And you see it's these little squares that are then sewn together. And it's been used by my Ghanaian colleague, Adam Spodomo, to describe multilingualism in Ghana, a kente of changing colors. So you have the same idea. You have Africans coming to Finland, a multilingual country, who are themselves multilingual and come from a continent that is a hotspot of linguistic diversity, where languages also have many, many different and changing roles. So how does this then look like? I wanted to give you first some concrete examples of Africans in Finland before I talk about the languages. And because I myself specialize in West African languages, I start with something close to my heart, and I talk about the Senegalese diaspora in Finland. And Senegalese in Finland are not very numerous. They're one of the smaller groups, but they are very visible. And one reason is because they have a very efficient transnational network, the Murid network. And the Murids are an Islamic brotherhood that have a great tradition of labor migration and of creating diaspora support networks. So Senegalese or Gambians who are membership of the Murid brotherhood and who arrive in Finland really can tap into a community that provides financial support, integration, cultural and religious identity. And so here you see actually a poster that I saw on Facebook about an important religious festival, the Magal, that was held in Helsinki in 2020. By the way, this is very rare. It's very rare to see Senegalese posting information in English. What you see very often, for instance, on the Facebook page of the Senegal-Finland friendship group, is posts in a mix of French and Finnish. And normally it's the Finns who try to provide content in French, and the Senegalese very often post in Finnish because they haven't learned to read and write French at school. So their language of literacy is Finnish. And these Senegalese also have very particular history because they have enriched Finnish cultural life in many different ways. Some of you may know the well-known Finnish musician Hasse Valli, who is now in his 70s, I believe. So he has a long, very diverse musical career ranging from, I think, jazz to rock and roll. But from the 1970s, he spent several decades regularly traveling to Senegal, living in Dakar, and working with Senegalese musicians, several of whom he also invited to come to Finland. And this then also has become a nexus for migration, attracting other Senegalese dancers and musicians who found a way of life in Finland, working with Finnish musicians. And because it's getting late, oh, I think I forgot to share my sound. I'll still play this this short clip just to give you a little taster of this musical collaboration, also of the Wolof language that you can hear in it. And sorry for the bad sound. From the background and the greenery, you can see that this music video was shot in Finland. And from the jewelry that the Senegalese drummer was wearing, you can see that he also is a Murid, so a member of this same religious brotherhood that I mentioned before. And this brings me to another connection, a very prolific two-way connection between Senegal and Finland, linked to the traveler, anthropologist, and journalist Helena Halmari that some of you may know. There is a museum in her name in Espoo. And she is an amazing, inspiring, also, I think, dividing personality. A journalist and traveler who somehow opened the world to Finnish audiences through her travelogues and books, and also through being a collector, for instance, of religious artifacts, not only from Senegal, but also from Afro-Brazilian religions and Brazil and Cuba. She also traveled widely through Asia and brought back objects that you can now see in the museum that bears her name, but also created connections with people, invited people from the countries she traveled to. And this is actually a tradition that is continued in the museum that regularly invites people from the countries that she visited and in which she carried out research. And this really struck me when I came to Finland, because I lived in London for 17 years before, where, of course, there's a huge post-colonial African diaspora. And, of course, there are many British Caribbeans. But what was really striking me in Finland was the importance of these personal connections in order to create really small-scale migration networks. So people like Hasse Valli or Helena Halmari, or if you talk about Benin, for instance, there is the Villa Caro in Benin, and that's also a magnet to create cultural exchange. And that is something that is really particular, and I think it's related to the fact that Finland is so small and that personal connections reach really far. But now I come to the linguistic part of my presentation, and I thought it would be most interesting to tell you about questions of language ownership, but also of what happens when multilingual people migrate and how their linguistic repertoires are perceived and assessed in a context that has a very different language culture. And you will hear many things that resonate with Kopeli's presentation. You will also hear about the impact of monolingual ideologies and of colonialism. So, African languages in Finland. These numbers are from Statistics Finland, and they are strange because you have 57,000 Africans living in Finland today, about 1% of the population. And normally these statistics that ask for languages, they ask for one language only. So you would assume if you have 50,000 Africans, you would have 50,000 speakers of African languages. However, in the statistics, there are only 31,000 speakers of African languages. How is that possible? Well, I don't know, but my educated guess is that not all of the languages that people gave in response to the question, what is your language, were classified as African languages. And this may have several reasons. First of all, languages, the languages of European origin that were the colonial languages of most African countries and are still the official languages of the post-colonial nation states are commonly not counted as African languages, but as European languages. So if somebody answered that they are a speaker of French or English, probably this would not have been classified as an African language. But also Arabic is very often not categorized as an African language because there is this very fixed idea that Africa starts south of the Sahara, including in my own discipline, African linguistics. This has a long racist history, but Arabic, of course, belongs to a language family that has its origins and most of its speakers on the African continent. It's the Afro-Asiatic language family. So there's no reason not to regard Arabic as a language of African origin and as an African language based on the origin and location of many of its speakers. And it is also spoken in many countries of sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, in Sudan, in Chad, but it is also a language of religion that is of great importance for the millions of Muslim Africans. So we've already seen that these statistics are very reductive in offering a particular perspective on what is an African language, but also on how you determine languages by asking people to give one language with which they identify. Africa, however, is one of the hotspots of linguistic diversity. And this doesn't only mean that there are many, many different languages spoken on the African continent, but also that most Africans are extremely multilingual. Extremely, of course, only from a European perspective. Here is a map that illustrates this a little bit. Of course, you cannot really put multilingualism on maps, we know, but you can see the number of languages on this map of the world. And you can see that Africa has, particularly south of the Sahara, up to an area that does not quite comprise the Horn of Africa, an enormous density of languages. And this means that you have languages that are associated with one village or a group of villages. And the smaller the language areas, the more thickly multilingual its speakers tend to be because they have intense relationships with communities around them, and linguistically diverse people live together. this multilingualism is also reflected in ways in which languages are written, or which languages are written and which languages are not written. Counter public imagination, Africa is not the oral continent, as which it is very often portrayed, but a continent with a very long history of literacy, and not only a long history of literacy, but a particular type of literacy, a cosmopolitan literacy. So very unlike the vernacular literacies that we, talking for Europeans here now from the 19th century onwards, where speakers are supposed to write their language. And this has not been the case in Africa for most of its history, where there have been many different writing systems, but they have mainly emerged around some focal languages, mostly languages of wider communication, very often languages that were associated with larger empires or with big religions, such as Islam, for the Arabic script, later the Latin script associated with Christianity. And so around these focal languages, literacy traditions have emerged and are still practiced. So here you see the East African language Swahili, which is one of the largest African languages, written in the Arabic script, so-called Ajami writing. And this tradition continues in modern literature, which is not a literature of native speaker writers, but a cosmopolitan literacy where multilingual people select one or several languages in which they write, based on various reflections, including intended audience or particular purpose, religious, for instance, or practical. So I mentioned that Africans are multilingual, and that Africa is one of the most linguistically diverse areas in the world. However, this does not hold when we come to formal education. Here you see a map that shows you only the official languages of Africa, and you see that linguistic diversity is greatly reduced compared to, the green dots that were all over the continent on the previous map. And this is because formal education takes place almost exclusively in the official languages, which for the vast majority of Africa are languages of colonial origin. And by languages, or by colonial languages, I do not only mean languages of European origin, such as French, English, Spanish, Portuguese, but I also mean the standard versions of African languages that were created in colonial times. So for instance, Standard Swahili, Standard Bambara, which are sometimes taught in schools, but which cause the same obstacles for learners as the other official languages, because these are not languages that learners are familiar with. These are not languages that they hear or use outside the school context. So the school and official domains tend to be a domain in which almost all languages are marginalized and in which most speakers are discriminated against, just as we have heard for other minority language contexts in Finland. And in Africa, the results are really dramatic. You have high dropout rates in formal education, and you have exclusion from civic participation for most inhabitants, and education systems that are factually catering only for very small elites and perpetuate these elite language policies. Now, oh, sorry, I have a typo here. This is terrible. It's of course School of Babel and not Babel. Please forgive me. So School of Babel. When these African migrants arrived in Finland, they are perceived as linguistically diverse. So, you know, schools in Helsinki are really perceived as a mini Babel with migrants with different repertoires coming together. But still, migrants, in particular African migrants, are very often misperceived because they do not fit into the monolingual mold that many Finnish educators have. So in Finland, I hear oma kieli all the time. So this idea of having one language, oma kieli, in the singular. It's never omat kielet. So the idea that people can have and use and identify with different languages and perhaps also change their language repertoire throughout their lifespan and their trajectories is really alien to this concept. The idea is that migrants, everybody has one language. This is a language, it's the native language. It's a language in which people have received formal education. It's the language which they read and write. And this is really far from the lived linguistic reality of African migrants. First of all, they are already multilingual before they come to Finland. Very often they have had very mobile lives before coming to Finland, and through these mobile lives, they have changed their repertoires. But also when they come to Finland, they very often change their linguistic practices. So for instance, depending on the support network they have, they may speak languages that have only played a minor role in their previous lives. So if I'm a Murid immigrant and I've perhaps spoken 2 or 3 smaller languages and a little bit of Wolof in Senegal, and all of a sudden my entire support network is Wolof speaking Murid, then all of a sudden Wolof becomes much more important. Likewise, if I am an East African migrant, I speak a Bantu language, I now start to go to a church in which a particular Bantu language, let's say Lingala, dominates. I will downplay my other languages and I will shift towards a different linguistic identity and practice. And this is something that Africans do in a very versatile manner. And it's also very interesting to see there is research carried out by my colleague Heini Lehtonen at the University of Helsinki on language life in Eastern Helsinki schools, that African migrants also do not draw the line at African languages. They do not stay in the box. So they also learn Russians if they hang out with many people in the Russian diaspora. I'm sure there must be some who speak Estonian as well. So this idea of the solitudes of languages, separate languages, each in their box, and ideally one box, one language occupying all functions in a person's life, does not correspond to the language cultures that these migrants bring, and it results in a complete miscommunication about linguistic repertoires and linguistic needs. I'm coming to the end now. So the reality is not languages in a box, but this rui, this wonderful carpet that is constantly rewoven, and not only because these migrants bring new languages with them, but also because even in Finland, they change their repertoires and add new texture and new colors. And there may be contexts in their lives in which one named language has a high significance, but they are also characterized by many contexts where they use playful innovation to participate in existing identities, and by doing so also transforming them, or by creating new shared identities. And the best example for this is, of course, Stadinslangi, the Helsinki slang, which is old. I think it comes from the late 19th century and reflects a playful multilingual identity that then was nurtured much by Russian, for instance, but also by Swedish. But now we have the new starting slangy, so new, playful, shared multilingual registers in which language boundaries are being transcended to create new identities. And in the new starting slangy, interestingly, you find, for instance, many words from Somali. So instead of saying moro aya, please forgive my pronunciation, or morias yatkat, you will now say morias waria. Waria is boy in Somali. And instead of saying mavannon, I swear, in Eastern Helsinki, you can be heard saying wallahi, which is the equivalent in Somali. To conclude, we have a multilingual country that has a long past, but that is, of course, not staying in this past, but constantly remixing and adapting its multilingualism. And the latest arrivals are African languages who continue to transform the Finnish language carpet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lutki. That was just fascinating. I liked your examples at the end, and I love the metaphors that our presenters have been using. This has been very, very rich session, and I thank the panelists for answering a lot of the questions already, so we can briefly address the remaining questions here. And just in the interest of time, the answers probably relatively short and summarized. Let's start with this. This is about the Sami DNA as compared to anybody else's DNA. Can we even address this issue? Is the Sami DNA different from other Nordic people's DNA structure?
I'm not sure I can answer this question, but I can think that research today does not really consider DNA as being a relevant or useful indicator for defining an ethnic group.
Mm-hmm. And definitely it has nothing to do with what language people use. I had my DNA done and I find Siberian there, so I think a lot of people. So anyway, so thank you. Then we have a question from Ionut Petronel. This is also about Sami. What is if you compare the situation with the Sami languages with the situation in, for instance, Spain, where there are multiple languages spoken in different areas of the nation, for instance, Catalan in Barcelona. Is this similar kind of situation or is it unique?
I'm not that familiar with the situation in Spain, so I'm not really sure how to compare, but I think one thing that might make it a bit easier in Sapmi is that it's a bit more coordinated, since there are different languages, but it's still the same, often quite the same authorities and the same financial board supporting the languages, and that Sami has also the status of being indigenous language, not only minorities who have this status. But comparing with other border areas in Europe that I know about, I can also say that in some places where efforts are not coordinated, you see a stronger effect of the activism or individual initiative, like like in the Flemish area where local association or people would just put up signs and it can just be there because there's a kind of local agreement for that. Whereas in Sweden, it's quite a long process if you want to put up road signs in Sami, because it has to go through this official, passing different authorities and different decision process that is quite complicated and quite slow.
Thank you. By the way, I love the graffiti, that example that you showed, because it's just when people come into contact with each other, languages come into contact with each other, and that leads to this kind of richness. Norm Ford from Suomi, Minnesota is asking about the term Lap and Lapland.
Good question. So the term Lap is a term that has been given to the Sami by outsiders, so by outside population from the Nordic countries, and that the term that was quite widely used until about the 70s in Nordic languages, but that progressively has been more and more defined as being has this negative connotation. So today it's not appropriate to use the term Lap. It's the term Sami that is the one more respectful, talking about the Sami population.
Thank you. And we have already seen that Kimmo can speak Romani and heard it. That was a great treat for everyone. And Norm also has a question about a visit to Finland. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we are covering all the languages that are spoken in Finland, but this is a good example of the fact that this is not everything. There's also Turkey. And Norm is asking, they saw pizza shops operated by people from Turkey. Is this isolated to food service business? Or how is that? Of course, Turkish has also a long history in Finland. Which of the panelists would like to address that? Helga, have you?
I'm not sure if I have any answer to this, but I think it's similar in Finland than in many European countries, that immigrants find employment in this food business, and I don't know if it's isolated to food service. I can't answer that. I'm not an expert in immigration. I don't know if anyone of you knows better.
I don't think it is isolated, but it's of course very visible when we go to Finland and we want to buy some food, and then we enter these places. It's like I've found it so fascinating going to my small village of Lempäälä, and I could buy Turkish kebab there. So it was wonderful. So, and this is just, I mean, it may be a very superficial thing to say, but this is part of what we get when we get the combination of different cultures in this room. We get all these wonderful cultural treats that come together with the different ethnicities. I think we've pretty much covered I do want to bring up one question that was already addressed by Kimmo in the written reply section, but that was where does Romani come from? Maybe we can address that as our final question here.
Do you want me to answer here orally, or?
Yes, why not? Because
Romani is it's a language of India. It's an Indic language that originates from Sanskrit and later on the Prakrits, as you know, all the Indian languages, and it's related, for instance, to Hindi. And later on, as the Roma migrated towards Europe, it came into a long-term contact with, for instance, with Greek and other Balkan languages that belong to the Balkan Sprachbund. And that's why also sometimes in Romani linguistics, it's considered a Balkanized Indic language.
Thank you. It's so it's quite different, as are the African languages. They don't belong to the Finno-Ugric group of languages that the other languages that we have covered here. belong, like Estonian and the Sami languages and Karelian. So those would be under the Finno-Ugric language groups. So do we have any other comments by other panelists here that you would like to conclude with?
There is quite a lot to discuss, but I understand also that we've been talking a lot and everyone's getting a bit tired. But I got a lot of inspiration and ideas, and I hope you feel the same.
Yes, that's what I hope too for everybody, and thank you so much for coming together. Thank you for our panelists. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Lotta and I will be in touch with you with the follow-up project. So just, be waiting for that. And thank you, audience. You have had excellent questions, and thank you for participating. And as I usually say, without you, we would not have an event. Please keep FinnFest in mind. March 26th, Nathan D. Gibson is presenting on a different topic, Finnabilly, American Roots Music and Rebellion in Finland. So moving back to music again, but it's the cultural diversity that we celebrate with music, with languages, and we wish everybody well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.